Welcome to today's webinar. I am Skylar with Lean Frontiers. On our screen, you can see Jim with Lean Frontiers and Jamie Flinchbaugh. I do want to do a quick reminder. The TWI and Kata Summit will be in Indiana in April of 2026. We do currently have a discount code going on. It is SEPT off, like the two words, and you receive $400 off. Also, since this is live, we do encourage you to send in a Q&A or chat in your question. I will be back here off screen monitoring that, and then we will also have Jim kind of monitoring that as well. Jim and Jamie, I believe we are good to go whenever you're ready.
All right. Thank you, Skylar. And thank you, Jamie, for joining us. Much appreciated.
Glad to be here.
Good. Hey, what we're going to talk about today, it was not usually much of a discussion, but certainly is an important thing, is typically we don't focus on lean professional. We talk about different functions, attributes, skills, techniques, and so forth. But today we are going to talk about that. So I guess we'll jump into it and get going. Have people like Skylar said, people post their questions in the chat, and I'll try to monitor that. We've got a lot of questions that we've gotten prior to. Some of them kind of overlap, so where they overlap, I'll try to kind of put them in together, and we go through this, and I think we'll get a lot of great discussion in here. So Jamie, I guess I'll start off with this, is if we look at lean professionals, often they're often put into efforts for efficiency gains, but the thing is, when we get into tough times, they can be the ones that are first to go, or those groups go, or be reduced. So how do we overcome that particular paradox?
Yeah, unfortunately, based on macroeconomic headwinds and just uncertainty and fear, we're certainly seeing plenty of headcount reductions going on in different companies, whether it's proactive out of concern or actual, sort of top line issues. I've seen sometimes groups get reduced, work really hard to justify themselves, or sometimes entirely get eliminated. So for starters, efficiency gains are often the most justifiable application because people can provide a clear return on investment, whereas things like cycle time reduction and even quality are just harder to really do good calculus on ROI. But back when I was doing consulting, I had a very simple assessment. I had a complicated one, I had a simple one, and I had 5 indicators on it. But one of them was connection to the business, or more accurately, connection to the business need. And really making sure that the lean efforts, including the lean team, were really sort of had some organizational savvy to understand what was going on, to make those connections, and to make sure we're sort of serving the strategy, the greatest needs, the people in those needs. So, you have high turnover, you might focus on clear roles. I did see one organization once where they kind of focused all their efforts on cost reduction, and then the organization had this boom, and the whole company was focused on maximum output, but all the lean resources were still focused on cost reduction. And the question was, do we still need this group? And then it was like, yeah, we just need them to work on some different stuff and help us with the scalability. So staying attuned to the business needs, short-term, long-term perspectives, and sort of where the strategy is going. And then I'll say more politically, making sure the decision makers are already aligned, whether it's educating them long before you get to a decision point about the value provided, or you reading where their priorities are and making sure you are at least aligned to them. That's all part of this, right? You are not an island unto yourself. And as much as we might think as lean professionals, we have a better read on what the priorities should be. They're not always our call. And so we can inform, we can educate, we can help, we can influence, but they're not our call, and we have to stay attuned to that.
Yeah, that's good. I do know, and these are the exception, definitely not the rules. We've been talking, as you mentioned, the companies that when there was a downturn, they actually took their CI people and even other people that were in manufacturing and putting them into that type of form, and they worked on improvements during that time and worked on some more broad-based training. So as things ramp back up, they were in a position to ramp back up rapidly. They're in a position to bring in more business. They're in a position to produce more, just because people were trained up and ready to go. But like I said, unfortunately, that's the exception, not the rule.
Yeah, and I'll use, sort of March through May 2020 as an example. Companies had to change how they worked, whether it was keeping people safe in operations or learning how to work remotely or distributed. And so I think the best, a lot of lean teams sort of went into stall mode, and the best ones went into let's help redesign work mode and jumped in and helped solve those challenges from a process design and even a skill set, a tool set, error proofing, things like that. So again, so whether the needs change rapidly or long term, we have to find ways to be helpful in those time periods.
Yeah. Okay, good. These next questions, actually, we got a couple similar questions. So I like I said, try to couch them together as best I can. That somebody asked, they've seen a lot of turnover in lean CI professionals. What experience? What is your experience with people moving on in 2 years? And it's really tied to another question. At least I think anyway. You can answer them separately. A lot of lean professionals reach ceilings. They may make it to a senior manager, director, maybe sometimes VP, depending on how companies name it, but don't really have further to go. Is this a problem? And what can we do about it? I guess I see these two questions very much closely related.
Yeah, I think they are. I think a lot of it depends on why you're doing the work as an individual, like what's your why, and how do you want to apply it? There's a lot of people that absolutely they want to apply it as a decision maker, right? They want to be a factory manager, a business unit general manager, a CEO. And so in those cases, a lean professional is really just a stepping stone or a gateway to other roles where they get to apply it as part of their daily decision making. And if you sort of care more about the application of lean than your particular role in it, then that's a great path. And training people in an internal team by having them spend a couple years into a team and then going back into a line leadership type of role in some sense is a great way to develop them as well. But you need balance, right? So if you have a 10-person team doing lean work, you can't have all 10 roles rotating in and out every 2 years. You'll have no continuity, you'll have no long-term view, you'll have no depth in the team. So having, maybe three of those roles be more high rotation and maybe three of those roles be slower rotation and maybe three of those, three or four of those roles be permanent gives you all aspects of that. Um, but again, we go back to what's our why. And yeah, we can change, some companies have an exec staff role member where they are in a lean role. Some it's a director level, some it's just sort of a senior manager role. Um, but even in those extreme cases where they'll sit on exec staff, there's still a ceiling in those
Yeah.
cases. But you have to ask yourself, what work do you want to be doing? Um, and sometimes that comes with a ceiling, right? I'll compare it to healthcare. There's a lot of people that, they get into nursing to help people, and then they, become a supervisor, a manager, and all of a sudden they're not doing nursing work anymore. And they're like, that's not what I really wanted to do. Some it was great. Others, they go back to the line. They go back to doing the work of a nurse. And I think the same is true as of a lean professional. Do you want to be primarily out there, coaching, facilitating, training, doing some of those activities? And that's even true for external resources, consultants that are out there. Um, talk to people that, they want to go be a consultant, do some of this work. Well, the only way up from there is to, run the consulting company. But now you're spending your time doing proposals and hiring, firing, and doing taxes. And it's like, wait a minute, that's not why I got into this.
Exactly.
And so I think, if you understand your why, if you understand your purpose and what work you want to do, that all then has options and consequences. And I think if the consequences are, I want to do this work, and with it comes a ceiling, I think that's perfectly okay. And we should acknowledge that and actually embrace it, and then just do that really, really well.
Yeah, it's a couple things I noticed that you mentioned that is what kind of depth, kind of related to, and what work do you want to be doing of over the year? And I'm assuming you have too. I've talked with people that kind of in that I've done this, I kind of move on. I feel like I'm in a at a ceiling or just stuck in it. And usually, like the questioning, always questioning is ask a few questions, and it's also, well, yeah, there may be other opportunities in other organizations, but is there still actual learning? You can still get where you're at despite those barriers and all that. And usually, not 100% of the time, but a lot of times, it's like, yeah, there are other things that they have an interest in learning, and they would have potentially have the opportunity where they're at. So I'd say, spend some time doing that, and it may break something else open within the organization you're in. Not always, but potentially.
Yeah, 100%. I think often people fail to recognize whatever is frustrating them. And I have this conversation even with some of the people I advise one-on-one. Whatever's frustrating you and you feel like you need to move on, why don't you try to solve that problem in the role you're in first
Yeah.
before just leaping somewhere else to try to find that problem solving itself? And I think in the lean professional space, a lot of times people kind of get stuck doing the same work over and over again, whether it's teaching the same class. It's like, yeah, but you're really good at it. Well,
Yeah.
yeah, but how much are you learning by teaching this? I taught the same class for 15 years in my consulting days, and I still learned a lot from the questions, but less and less as time went
Yeah.
on because the questions started, to sort of repeat. And so fundamentally, how do you pass on some of the work you're doing, embrace other work, and cultivate that in a way that really works for you? And so your portfolio, if you kind of map out your portfolio of stuff you're working on, if it's not leading to some learning, it's probably not going to work for you.
Yeah. Yeah. Great point. Actually, that it's kind of interesting. Some of these questions you've got have actually built on each other, so that's good. So the next question is where should a lean professional report? Many will advocate to the CEO, but certainly is that always the best avenue or best place to report?
Yeah, I think it really depends on the people, right? So when we think about, I'm actually working on a white paper on org design right now, but sometimes we design an org with names not on boxes, and we kind of just go, what's the right org design for all stuff, right? Not just the lean stuff. And then sometimes we kind of go, what are the talents and capabilities and gaps that we have and the people that we have, and how do we design around those gaps? And we never want to be too far in either one of those extremes. But often a smaller organization will be more designed around the talent, larger, more around sort of empty boxes. But I do remember a lesson I had back in my consulting days. We had a client, and sort of just as the champion, the COO was the champion of the lean journey. And then we talked for several years with this client around making the CEO the champion, kind of elevating the champion role up to the CEO. And as we tried to, it wasn't taking. And we looked at it harder, and the CEO spent about 70% of their time outside the company, shareholders, investors, customers, banks, regulatory bodies, other organizations. And if you said when people look for cultural influence of the organization, who are they looking to? And
Yeah.
they all had the same name. It was the COO. And so in the end, he was absolutely the right sponsor for this work. So I've seen, I've seen it report to the CIO, the head of HR, the head of ops, the head of product development. I've seen it follow a leader as that leader moved throughout the organization just because he's the right leader. And so as this person moved from one role to the next, the lean team just moved with it because they knew that person would be the right sponsor for the work. So, uh, in general, I will say I do always hesitate to have it report to sort of a head of operations because it's already so often seen as just an operations thing
Yeah.
that it just sort of doubles that perception. And if so, we sort of split the team in half and have dual sponsors, right? One for inside operations, one without, and just make sure the cohesion between the two groups of resources is held true. So I do always hesitate. Sometimes they're the right individual, and we just hold our nose and get past that. But 9 times out of 10, I'm looking at who is the right individual to lead this, and do they have the capacity and bandwidth and interest in supporting it as a sponsor, and then that's where we go because they'll knock down all the barriers we need and do the right sponsorship work for the lean resources.
Yeah, that kind of makes me think of just what you were discussing previously about the ceiling aspect and people wanting to move on after 2 years. It may be, yeah, just going somewhere else, reporting to somebody else, which may give you the opportunity to get skills from a lean perspective and either even other business perspectives that you may not have where you're currently at, or may not get if you jump to another organization and back into something similar you're already in. So there may be some horizontal things that I've seen people have the opportunity to go do, so they can go learn new skills, hone their CI skills in a different arena, even within the same organization.
Yeah, absolutely. And we spend a lot of our time as in the lean community trying to convince other people to get out of their comfort zone. Um, Boy, we should be doing that a lot ourselves, right? Lead
Yeah.
from within. And so whether that's a new environment or just a new situation, a new scenario, 100%. And that was, again, back in my consulting days, I would very much look for if we had a new client that was really new for whatever reason. Maybe they were super small, or maybe they were growing really fast, or maybe it was just a different industry. I sort of greedily wanted to kind of spend my time with that, um, just because for myself I would learn a lot from it. As a result, I've had a chance to touch almost every industry at some point of my engagements.
Okay, good. Actually, somebody did post a question. Brittany Brown asked, "What do you recommend as far as required education for a lean professional? There are not many CI OpEx focused programs through MBAs yet, anyway. So, what would you recommend?"
Yeah, so I think the first thing I'd say is, I mean, you and I have been doing this long enough that there were no classes, there was no training, right? We we learned through doing and coaching,
Yep.
right? And so that's still number one for me, or number one and two together. Those should be coupled. But learn through your own PDSA cycles with a coach, with a mentor, with very deliberate practice. And so, yeah, will it be ugly? Will you know all the terms? Will you be able to rattle off quotes from authors off the top of your head? Will somebody else know more than you? All those things are concerns, but um, to me, that's where the real learning is fundamentally going to occur. And I kind of tell people looking at this, I never went to lean training because it didn't exist. We were developing some of that, at least for companies I was embedded in the early days of those journeys. There was coaching, there was application, there's no training. And so the only training I ever sat through was either training I did myself or when I had clients say, "Hey, could you observe and give us feedback?"
Yeah.
Um, so to me, that's number one. Beyond that, I think there's sort of two buckets of sort of training that I'll say lean professionals should look through. I think companies should develop a slow as you go template for this is what we want everybody to go through, whether it's internal, external, online, reading books, right? Throw in some book clubs, some free online videos, some paid for videos. some in-person classes, some internal classes, but put together a recipe and then say, here's what we want everybody to go through, whether it takes, 2 years or 10. And then second, some very targeted opportunities to go tackle specific knowledge gaps. You go learn some more about product development or HR or whatever it is, right? And that's where some of your programs from Lean Accounting Summit at the very beginning and all the different derivatives that have come since, where let's go learn about some specific things in a deeply focused environment come from. So I think you supplement the ad hoc with the recipe, but you never, you don't gatekeep. That's I think my big warning.
Yeah.
Don't gatekeep people getting to do the work. Start doing the work, learn by PDSA, and make sure there's good coaching in place.
Yeah, it's funny you say that because the learn by doing, years ago we used to call it learn by suffering, and we didn't necessarily mean it in a totally negative way. It's just, you're right, there wasn't necessarily a lot of stuff out there, so you literally had to go do through, like I said, through the iterative process, plan, do, check, act process. A lot of times we didn't have, and somebody did post a question, I'll ask this, kind of related to this. We didn't have coaches necessarily that are higher level. We just had each other, so we would, in a way, cross coach each other because somebody's observing you. They can ask you good questions that you didn't necessarily always think of. And we do it back and forth each other. And that was all part of what we, like said, back, 20, 25, 30 years ago, we call learn by suffering. Well, we'll just go out there and see if it blows up in our face or not. But either way, we'll learn.
Either way. Absolutely.
George actually asks, he mentions, I still believe serious lean professionals need to find a more experienced coach. Yeah, I certainly agree. What do you think? I agree. I don't know if they're always available, but you could probably give more detail on that.
Yeah, I think that should always be the goal. Always find people with more experience, who can help you not touch the hot stove, right? Kind of avoid some of the suffering that is unnecessary because that's not true some of the time. That's true all the time, right? So don't touch the hot stove kind of things. I think also if that experienced coach has good coaching skills, which isn't always true, but is an important aspect, then they're going to help accelerate. That just gives juice to the PDSA's learning cycle. So I think good coaching skills almost matter more than good lean experience in some of those cases. However, if that's not available, I don't think that should limit you. And I'll share what I mean, because sometimes whether it's budget or a company's getting, they're just starting from square zero, right? And they don't have a budget for coaching. They haven't hired anybody. No, we've just decided, let's get going, right? I was fortunate I had access to good coaches early on, from Awada-san to Kent Bowen, to Jamie Benini, who I worked with at Chrysler. But if you don't have them, I think, one, be your own coach through reflection and journaling, right? If you put enough time and effort into it, you can, again, I use plan, do, study, act. So when I say PDCA, that's what I'm referring to, plan, do, check, act. I don't really care, right? Just whatever learning cycle you like, execute your own learning cycles through reflection and journaling and be very deliberate and thoughtful about it. That you can do without anyone even knowing you're doing it, if that's the world of control you have. If not, we can still use sort of standard work and guides around being a good coach without knowledge of the topic to help each other, by asking questions, whether we pull out kata methodologies, or I was always a big fan of the GROW coaching model, and I don't want to go into, a lot of details there, but just teach somebody some standard work for coaching, and then, hey, they'll coach me, I'll coach them. We'll both learn together because we have a partner. And they may not know whether the stove is hot or not, but they can help me digest the learning cycle once I discover that. So again, not to gatekeep, I don't think we should let that hold us back, but good coaches are accelerant for good learning.
Actually, some of you say that as far as like the journaling and doing your own analysis. One thing I've found over the years is people that aren't lean people, but are subject matter experts in certain things you might be dealing with. They're not going to coach you necessarily in lean, but they can give you good insight and help you with that analysis part as you're going. How do I apply maybe this, whatever lean perspective or whatever you might want to call it, but how do I apply it within something that I'm not a subject matter expert in it? They can help, in a sense, give you some level of guidance through that.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's part of that accelerant. Fewer failed cycles, fail as in didn't learn, and more juice out of the good learning cycles.
Yeah, George asked again, he said in some circles, there is a second coach and a first coach title, which is more experienced coach. I don't know if you've found that in anything.
Yeah, I think some people just find that pattern to be true elsewhere. I mean, there's organizations I actually currently work with where I'm coaching the coach, but I'm not coaching the organization. They have people inside the organization who are doing coaching, and then they're just sort of bringing when they're stuck. That's when we're having conversations. So I'm working with one person who's in a director role who's working with two execs who are just at each other, and so they're trying to coach and I'm helping coach that coach on how to resolve those conflicts. So I don't know if people call it that, but I think just like psychology, everybody should have a coach. So when if you're a coach, where do you go when you're stuck, or where do you go all the time for your own continued development? So I think the pattern often ends up true, whether it's deliberate or not.
Okay. Another question came in, and I asked this question. I do want to get to another couple questions that we have before we get out of here. It says, have you ever tackled creating awareness on lean and the value businesses can derive from it? Speaking from an African context where it is slowly being taken up, but there's a lot of convincing that happens before securing a client. Majority see lean as a cost-cutting measure and not necessarily an improvement, which I don't know if that's, I know African context, but I think that might just be, we see that everywhere.
Yeah, we see that everywhere. I think that's common, and it's a common starting point, right? We have a problem we want to solve, and work design will resolve that, and so let's go get some help on work design. So I think fundamentally it starts small, right? Don't get people to commit to a 5-year journey and ask them to jump off a cliff. Start small. Let's develop some model areas. Let's take on some projects, and let's take on some people. Let's develop some internal thought leadership, ownership, sponsorship of some people who are close enough to it that they see how it works and why, and have the decision-making rights to go do something about that. And we could get into road mapping. That's a whole detour, but yeah. To me, start small. Make sure you're building the ingredients to take the second steps.
Well, I do want to ask, and like I said, a couple questions came in on this, and it's the newish thing, and I've been hearing a lot about this. Is from a lean professional, in evaluating whether AI is an aid or a threat. Basically, how has AI maybe transformed the lean approach?
Yeah, so I think like all technologies, it depends on how we use it. I think especially when it comes to improvement and problem solving and things like that, AI and other automation tech tools either make things better, they're more effective, or they make them more efficient. I think when it comes to those things, the efficiencies gains are not really there. Problem solve faster, troubleshoot faster in domains that we have no expertise and no knowledge of whatsoever. Hey, this blinking light's going on. What could it be? Right? That sure, it can get you there faster. But I really like the term Ethan Mollick uses, which is co-intelligence. And I'm actually probably going to do a video on this, kind of demonstrate, hey, I'm trying to frame my problem, and we're going to talk about the problem statement for a while, but can I use AI to input just mind dump everything I know about the problem and generate 5 or 6 versions of a problem statement, which I may not use, but it may get me closer to the framing of the problem that I actually want. Or when we're in, hey, what is the approach I want to take to understanding current reality? Or I'm in ideation phase, and I think 9 times out of 10, or at least 3 out of 4, I don't have data on this, but it's not actually going to give you the answer, but it might trigger or inspire the answer faster by broadening your aperture, deepen it. I think there's sort of 3 roles you can give AI to help this out. One, act as a problem-solving coach or an improvement coach or whatever it is. And you can even feed in, hey, here's my PowerPoint deck on how to do this. So use this as your instruction manual. And then I'm going to ask you the questions, and then you kind of prompt me back as a coach. Now, always remember, AI gets enthusiastic and it will want to jump like 5 steps ahead of you. So you have to give it very clear instructions about where you want it to go next. Second is a subject matter expert, like act as an expert in inventory management and give me here's my problem, and give me some ideas that I might not have thought of. And then I think the third is sort of the odd perspective, right? So, hey, if Chick-fil-A were to solve this problem, how would they solve it? How would Disney solve it? How would Mark Twain solve it? How would Albert Einstein solve it? So you can kind of give it a personality which will, refer back to, what we know about those entities or individuals and say, hey, maybe that'll give me a different idea around that problem. So again, I think it can help stimulate us and can help broaden our thinking, maybe break us out of a creative rut, do things like that. And as a lead professional, we can use it as a second team member or a 10th team member, just sort of one ingredient into the team, but really never as a replacement.
Yeah, never as a replacement. Yeah. Enhancement, not replacement.
Yep.
Good point. Okay, well, we're kind of at the bottom hour. I think we've hit our target time. One thing I will mention is actually Mark Warren put a comment in here who's got a depth of knowledge on very depth of knowledge of TWI. He mentions that the second coach label probably came from TWI GI program when managers had their own pocket card and were coaching the supervisors. So for the Toyota folks, first coach, second coach came from a derivative out of TWI.
Makes sense.
So anyway, what's that? We have a lot more we could possibly discuss, but we want to, respect our time and people's time and all that. So, Jamie, thank you so much for the discussion.
Thank you.
We have to do it again because there are more questions that we have. We can talk about and discuss. So, thank you again. And I guess with that, Skylar, I'll hand it back to you.
Thank you, everybody, for attending today. Jamie, thank you again. Quick reminder, you will receive a link from me within 24 to 48 hours. Everybody have a good rest of your day. We'll see you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you.